Okay, so in this chapter we have two main questions that we want to focus on. What issues in the Articles of Confederation called for political change, and to what extent did economic interests play a role in the formation of the Constitution? Before we delve into this, we must look at the people in America after the Revolution. When the war ended, there was basically a huge party in America where rich and poor alike drank and celebrated the republic they had won. But then reality set in, and the country had to be organized somehow, leading to some men rising above others. To start, the white male landowners were the only ones who could vote, while the poor were hardly accounted for but were used as an inexpensive labor source. Women's rights hardly changed in the long run, as women were still considered dependent and inferior. So, with the white population, hardly anything changed socially, as compared to before the war. African Americans, on the other hand, did see a spark of freedom in this time. Some free African American communities popped up after nearly 100,000 were freed during and after the war. Also, the revolutionary principles of liberty and equality that were fought for caused some of the white population to mentally challenge slavery. In the North, gradual, complete emancipation of slavery pushed African American men to a similar social status of a poor white man. Native Americans were hit hardest. They sided with the British or stayed neutral, and after the British defeat, Americans were not only angry but were pushing for more land. So, to govern this assortment, they created a confederation, similar to an agreed bond between the American states that they were more or less together in one nation, but what this really meant was the states had a lot of individual power and were sort of like mini countries. State constitutions held much more power than the Congress under the Articles of Confederation, mainly because they could tax and have militias. Many tried to sever ties between church and state in the government, but as many people of this time were very religious, it was hard to eradicate religion from the government completely. In the South, where a very small proportion of even white men could vote, usually large plantation owners, the government figures were sometimes corrupt and self-interested. The Articles of Confederation, which was the governing system of the colonies at this time, allowed Congress basically to only handle national matters, like Indian conflicts and disputes between states, but as they could not directly tax, it was difficult to act at all. The Articles of Confederation were not suitable guidelines for a national government, as they did not protect the security of the national economy, they did not adequately allow for positive international diplomatic relations, and these inadequacies created the need for a reformed national government.
One of the largest problems with the Articles of Confederation was that it didn't allow Congress to tax the people. See, after the Revolution, America was neck-deep in war debt. To pay off the debt, America was forced to borrow from other European countries, causing a $28 million deficit. But since Congress couldn't tax, the debt couldn't be paid off. In an attempt to pay off the debt, Congress began printing more money, causing mass inflation. Since people's money was no longer worth much, to buy necessary goods, people had to go off credit. This caused a humongous credit bubble that no one could pay off. This bubble resulted in the falling of wages and mass foreclosure on houses. The reason why wages dropped and foreclosure increased was because of the conflict between debtors and creditors. See, debtors were the common folk in debt, and the creditors were the wealthy people who gave out loans. The creditors who wanted their money back put forth the idea that the states should tax the people in order to pay off the country's debt. The result was loss of homes and loss of wages. The situation got so bad that a group of people actually overthrew the courts so they could keep their homes. This is called the Shays' Rebellion. In an attempt to solve this crisis, the Congress consolidated power by merging states, allowing them to have more control. This came to be known as the Northwest Ordinance and was enacted in 1787, just a few months before the Constitution was written.
During the period of the First Republic, America had shaky diplomatic relations with Britain and with Spain due to the heavy war debts that America carried with Britain, and also due to the inability of Spain to recognize the Treaty of Paris's boundaries.
During the period of the First Republic,
American relationships with Britain and with Spain were shaky. The American war debts were evident in the Treaty of Paris. The Confederation Congress approved the Treaty of Paris in 1783 and signed it on September 3rd, 1783. It formally ended the American Revolutionary War. The peace treaty prominently focused on the debts from pre-war. It called for payment of all pre-war debts at full value in sterling money, especially hard amongst common tobacco planters whose slaves had been freed or captured by the British Army. It also called for the restoration of confiscated Loyalist property and to stop persecution of Loyalists. Because America so frankly failed at fulfilling their end of the treaty, Britain itself had refused to abandon the forts in the West and in New York. The further involvement of Britain in America would harm American trade. Due to the debts that America carried, an impasse with Britain took place. As for the Spanish relationship, after the American Revolutionary War, America was guaranteed the new southern and western boundaries in the Treaty of Paris. Spain, however, fought for a more northern border of the United States and to limit the Americans of exploring the Mississippi River. The Americans, Spanish, and Indians all struggled for control of the Mississippi. Spain wanted to control the Mississippi for trade and to exploit the Indian groups. They made alliances with Indians and closed the Mississippi River within Spanish territory to American trade. An American negotiator, John Jay, accepted a Spanish proposal for the hands-off of the Mississippi River for 30 years, leading to trade concessions in Spain. It would negatively affect the agrarian and slave culture of the South. 9 states were required to vote for a ratification of the treaty, but only 7 northern states voted. The sectionalism of America became evident, and the need for a stronger republic became evident. This also showed how much the Articles of Confederation needed to be improved.
By 1786, it was widely agreed that something in the Articles of Confederation needed to change. They could not deal with the mounting crises facing the country. So, the Congress called a convention in Annapolis to reform primarily trade regulations in order to better help with the mounting debt. At the Annapolis Convention in 1786, a group of nationalist delegates who favored a stronger national government called on the convention to not reform trade, but to put to Congress a proposal for another convention the next year in Philadelphia for a larger general political reform of the Articles of Confederation. In 1787, all states except for Rhode Island sent delegates to Philadelphia to reform the Articles of Confederation. This meeting was done in secret without knowledge of the general public. 2 main plans for the formation of a new legislative branch were proposed. The Virginia plan, which gave 2 houses based on population, was proposed by James Madison of Virginia. The New Jersey plan gave 1 House legislature, with each state having 1 vote, as in the current system. A compromise came with 2 House system, with the lower house, the House of Representatives, having by population, and the upper house, the Senate, by each state having 2 votes. And also, in order to appease the southern states, for representation, each slave was counted 3/5 of a person. The delegates also established an office of the national executive. They called this the president. They feared that if the majority of the population was allowed to popularly elect the president, that it could become controlled by special interests and would not necessarily reflect the best possible choice. So they created the Electoral College, a very complex system, and it was not directly elected. They also created the Supreme Court that would control and decide if laws passed fit the Constitution. This created a system of checks and balances to avoid the style of tyranny that happened under the British, where the executive led the military, but only Congress could declare war, and the Congress could also impeach the president. And the Supreme Court could declare laws unconstitutional. So, with this new constitution created, it had to be ratified by 3/4 of the state. This created 2 political groups: the Federalists, led by James Madison, in favor of ratification, and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were generally wealthy commercial interests in coastal lands. They wanted a stronger national government to ensure that their debts were paid back. The Anti-Federalists were generally farmers from more rural, backwoods areas and state-centered politicians who believed it took too much power from the states. In order to appease the Anti-Federalists, James Madison created the Bill of Rights, 10 amendments to the Constitution, giving the people protections from the government. One important amendment to appease the states' rights proponents was the 10th Amendment that gives some rights back to the states.
The Constitution and the Bill of Rights were the structure by which the reformed government would function. These political guidelines sought to improve the security of the national economy, and they gave the federal government power needed to effectively run the country, while still limiting the chances of tyranny and clarifying the many rights of states and citizens. This important and necessary compromise was the birth of an American era.